Hello and welcome. My name is Marche Iverson. I'm the Managing Director of the Mental Health and Addiction Recovery team here at MusiCares. I'm so glad you can join us today for what promises to be an insightful and empowering session. Today's webinar is titled Suicide Awareness in the Music Industry, a critical conversation that's often difficult to have, yet deeply necessary. While mental health struggles are widespread in the music community, suicide remains a subject many shy away from. By shining a light on it through awareness and open dialogue, we move closer to a culture of understanding, support, and hope for those who need it most. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Katie Hurley, LCSW, DSW, and the Senior Director of Clinical Advising and Community Programs at the Jed Foundation. As an expert in the field, she brings powerful insights and is deeply committed to educating communities about suicide awareness and prevention. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Katie.
Thank you so much, Marche, and thank you to MusiCares for having me. I'm actually really excited to be here. MusiCares has a special place in my heart. I'm married to a musician. Sean Harley is my husband. He's a bass player. To many, as you all know in the industry, the bass players get to hop around, and he is one of those. And he has done some work with MusiCares in the past, so we always enjoy getting to connect with MusiCares and our musical community. It's, as you all know, music is family, and I've been in it for a long time, for 25 years now. So let me talk to you a little bit about the Jed Foundation. The Jed Foundation was founded in 2000 by Phil and Donna Satow. A lot of people ask me what JED stands for, what JED stands for, and actually JED stands for the name Jed. Jed Satow was a student at the University of Arizona when he unexpectedly died by suicide. And when Phil and Donna were meeting with administrators from the school afterwards and trying to pick up the pieces and figure out sort of what got missed and what went wrong, they met with the president of the university and said, "What happened? Is there some kind of a safety net? What didn't we know about?" And he looked at them and said, "I wish I knew. I have 39,000 students to look after every single day. And if you can tell me how to build that net, I'll build it." And that's what they did. And that's what the Jed Foundation is. We are an upstream public health nonprofit, and we started out working in colleges and community colleges of all different sizes. And now we've spread out and work in high schools, in K-12 districts, and in community-based organizations. And that's where I am in the Jed Foundation. And that's why I'm here today with all of you. So whenever we give a program like this, we just like to talk about thinking about who else is in the room, thinking about what other people have been through. Suicide and mental health touch absolutely everybody in some way. There's no one out there that doesn't have some kind of a story. And so, we just like to remember when you're talking after you watch this to think about your words and to think about how you approach people and how you comment on things like this, because our words really matter and can make a big difference between opening up important conversations and actually accidentally shutting them down. So today we're going to talk about a lot of things, and I talk a lot and I talk fast. So I'm trying to moderate my speaking right now. But we are going to start with recognizing signs of stress. We're going to talk about navigating support in the music industry, which is difficult with music being so large and vast and in so many spaces. We'll talk about key terms, words to say, words not to say, how to get help, how to do what's called a warm handoff. And then just taking care of ourselves as we try to help take care of others. One thing we always say at the Jed Foundation is that anybody can help somebody through distress. You don't have to be a trained clinician. I happen to be a trained clinician, 28 years in the field, but you don't have to be. You can learn how to ask the right questions and provide the right kind of support. So this is sort of the agenda for today, and we'll jump right into it. So we'll begin by talking about what's not said. A lot of times with emotions and with depression and with anxiety and even suicidal thinking, there's a lot of internalizing that happens, but there's also a lot of quiet signs, whether they're facial expressions or behaviors that people engage in, that if we can learn to catch them, we can learn to help. But let's start with just a little bit of stats specific to the music industry. So those first three numbers you see on the top part of this screen all actually come from the Wellness in Music survey commissioned by MusiCares. And so what they found in the latest survey was 47% of the respondents attributed their stress to financial issues, and 44 attributed anxiety to financial issues. We know from other surveys, there was another survey done that showed that 81% of musicians are anxious about financial stress. So we know that finances are a big source of stress for people in the music industry. 8.3% of respondents had serious thoughts of suicide in the previous year to the reporting period. That's compared to 5% in the general population. So that's a pretty big uptick from the general population to music. Of that 8.3%, just over 15% made a suicide plan, and 3.5% made a suicide attempt. Now, an interesting thing in the music industry statistics is that right now we know that men are having a mental health crisis, and we're seeing higher rates of men and young men attempting suicide. But specific to the music industry, women come in higher at suicide attempts and suicides. In a separate study from MusiCares, 36% of respondents reported moderate to severe depression. That's a pretty high amount. 33.5% reported moderate to severe anxiety. And 65.4% screened positive for substance misuse. So we also know that substance misuse is very closely tied to depression and anxiety. And so I always say that in mental health, everything is interconnected. It's really hard to just pull out individual statistics and say this is happening here and this is happening here, because more often than not, those things are happening together. Let's just talk about mental health for a moment. When people think about mental health, they're always thinking about the mental health conditions that are diagnosable. And that makes sense because that's kind of what falls under the umbrella of mental health. But actually, we like to say that everybody has mental health. Sometimes we're in a more healthy and positive headspace. Sometimes we're not. A lot of the time, we're just kind of in the middle. So mental health exists on a continuum, with thriving on sort of that really great part of mental health on that one end where things are going well. And even though we have challenges, we know how to overcome them. We know how to work through them, and things are going kind of okay, right? On the other end of that continuum is distress. Distress is where suicidal ideation lives. And actually, we know from research that on average, a period of distress when someone is considering suicide is about 15 minutes, with 45 minutes being at the higher end, but about average is 15 minutes. And so in 15 minutes, we can all learn how to help someone deactivate that stress, how to help someone through that moment so that they stay with us. Like I said, most of us are somewhere in the middle. So it is perfectly normal to have stress on any given day. And I think right now it's perfectly normal to have stress a lot. It's a lot of people will just say they're steady. They're not in distress. They're not thriving. They're just kind of doing their thing. They're going to work every day. They're getting their things done. They're being part of their families and relationships. But it's very common for people to kind of weave in and out of each of these parts of the continuum. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the quiet signals that might need our attention. Appearance is a big one. So I always say, you know your person's baseline. So if you're in a band, or if you're a manager, or, on the crew, you know what people normally show up looking like and seeming like, right? What their kind of baseline mood is and what their baseline appearance is. If someone changes drastically, and that change continues for over a period of a couple of weeks, that's usually a good indicator that something's not right. People, as a rule, tend to be creatures of habit and like their routines and kind of do their thing. If that thing is changing significantly and they're looking very exhausted all the time, and they're looking like they can't get enough sleep, and like maybe they're not eating enough, or they're eating all the time, these are all good indicators that something's happening. They're struggling with something. We might just not know exactly what it is. Mood for adults is tricky. Men are still to this day socialized to be internalizers. So to keep it all in and not really share how they're feeling, and to try to power through the day. And so a lot of men are very adept at this. They're good at it, and they wait until the end of the day, and maybe that's where some of the substance misuse comes in to calm down from those moods they've been pushing down all day long every day. Women are socialized more to talk about what they're going through, but also in this specific industry, the work days are long, whether you're in a studio for 12, 13 hours at a clip or on the road and living on a bus and town to town and showering in strange places. I've done all those things with my husband, and all of that takes a toll. And so mood can be a little bit tricky because you might think, someone's really not doing well. But then also everything in their environment is like, of course they're not doing well. They're living in this really precarious situation and then entertaining people every single night. So it's just something to watch. If you start to see a lot of anxious behaviors, or you start to see someone who just can't get out of bed in the morning, that's something to consider. When thinking about speech and thinking, depression in particular causes cognitive dysfunction. So having word finding problems, just really not being able to speak, like spacing out mid-sentence and not completing the sentence. That's kind of what we look for in those kind of silent signs. And then relationships might start to suffer. So people who normally were pretty interactive on the road or in the studio or by text or whatever are suddenly sort of dropping off and they're isolating. That's always kind of a red flag. And their performance might suffer, or any kind of work that they're doing within the industry might kind of suffer from not being able to get the sleep that they need and socialize in the way that they need. So I like to remind everybody that it's just not your fault if you don't recognize signs. In suicide, everything is 2020. My father died by suicide when I was 23 years old. As my mother and I cleaned out his stuff, weeks later, we came up with probably 20 signs that we should have recognized, but we didn't, because sometimes the signs are not that obvious. And so though you'll hear people talk about red flags, I always say the flags are more pink and pretty tattered and kind of hard to recognize. So it's good to know this stuff and have it in your head so that if someone is acting in a way that's different and you're not sure what's going on, you might think to say to them, hey, I noticed you're acting a little differently. Is everything okay? But also, if you don't recognize this stuff, it's really just not your fault. So a few things to remember. Number one, like I said, look for changes in typical behavior. So the baseline of your person. If they're funny, if they're not funny, if they're bitingly sarcastic, or, if they're kind of like very nerdy and always talking about interesting things. So if that changes, that's a sign. If someone who doesn't drink is suddenly drinking all the time, that's a sign, So look for those big changes. Number two, trust your gut and trust what you see. I always say that we will never regret asking the questions and making sure that our friend or colleague is okay, but we might regret it if we don't. And so just trust your gut. If something's off, something's off. And if the other person says, no, I'm totally fine, you're making it up, then okay, like at least you were a noticer and you tried. And then number three is you are not responsible for fixing other people. You are responsible for being a good person in the orbit of a person who might be struggling and looking out for them and saying, how are you and can I help and what can I do? But you aren't responsible for fixing problems. And the reason I say that is because, and I know this from all the folks I know that are musicians, that are in the industry, music and empathy tend to go hand in hand. And empathy is a beautiful thing and also sometimes a giant burden. And so sometimes feeling for others so deeply makes it hard for us to take care of ourselves. And so we're not the fixers. So we'll talk a little bit about how to start a conversation with someone. Now, I am fond of saying that if we all got into the habit of swapping how are you with how's your mental health, we'd actually get much better answers out of each other. Because how are you always lends itself to good, fine, great, thanks, how are you, and moving on. How's your mental health stops people in their tracks and makes them think. Now, I know that sounds totally awkward and that's probably not actually what you want to say, but I say it to people all the time now. So I'm hoping you'll kind of like join in with me and be a leader in asking people hard questions. When we ask this question, we're taking an interest in the other person. There are a lot of barriers to speaking up. And as Marche mentioned earlier, there's still a little bit of a stigma, even in the industry. And which is a strange dichotomy, actually, because music, by and large, makes people feel better. When people are struggling with their mental health, they turn to music. But the people making the music are often silently struggling and not able to speak up. And there are a lot of reasons why. Some of the reasons that we hear regularly are just, trying to keep things private, trying to separate their work life from what's happening internally, feeling ashamed, worrying, will there be consequences? So, will I get kicked out of the band? Will I get kicked off the tour? Will I be told I need to take a break? Will I even be able to get help? So really thinking through those kinds of things. A lot of people just feel like they don't want to be a burden to other people, and they feel like unloading these kinds of emotions will be a burden. And so, we'll talk about it in a minute, but when we're trying to be helpers to other people, the most important thing we can do is really just be good listeners. And then there are some folks who still kind of feel like no one's interested in this. This is not what people want to talk about right now. There are even barriers for people who want to be the helpers. And a big one for that is just wanting to respect people's privacy. I mean, by and large, especially here in America, we raise people to mind your own business, right? That is kind of a catchphrase that still is popular today. Like, think about yourself, worry about your own things, stay in your lane. Because of that kind of messaging, we all have it ingrained in our brains that we're not supposed to ask these questions. But I would argue that learning how to ask these questions just might be the thing that saves us all. Not really sure what's going on is another reason. Like, I think something's off, but I'm not really sure, so I don't want to start something if it's not right. Well, that goes back to that previous slide of trust your gut. And, if you think something is off, it doesn't hurt to ask. Worrying that, something will get blown out of proportion, and that it's just not, my place to ask that kind of a question. And then, within music, other people are protective of other people, right? It's a family, like I said. And so being mindful of not wanting to potentially hurt the work experiences of another player is a reason that people would kind of keep to themselves and not ask. So let's talk about some conversation tips. So closed-ended questions are questions like, how are you? Because you can get a one-word answer out of them. Or what happened to you? So we like to say, let's share specific concerns instead of asking these sort of very closed-ended questions where someone might give you one word or one sentence. Share your concern. Say, I noticed you've been sleeping more than normal and you're having a really hard time getting started each day. Can you tell me more about that? Can you tell me more about it is a nice, good, open-ended question that gives your colleague or friend a chance to really talk about what they're going through. There is a tendency to minimize concerns, and people actually do this from a good place. That is what I have learned in 28 years of direct practice. When people minimize, what they are saying is, you're going to be okay. I want you to be okay, and you're going to be okay. And that's why they say things like, well, it could be worse. No one in the history of people likes it could be worse as a response to somebody sharing something hard they're going through. But we do it because we're trying to pump people up. We're trying to be the hype people that say, hey, you can get through this hard time. It would be better to say, this sounds really hard, and I'm going to help you through this hard time. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So try validating their emotions. That sounds hard. That sounds awful. That sucks. Even just that 2-word sentence can make a big difference in the life of a person who's trying to confide in you. Instead of showing strong emotions like, oh my God, we got to get the tour manager, or we got to get somebody, who can we talk to? Let's call crisis text line right away. Instead of those sort of big reactions, just staying calm and listening and saying, tell me more. I'm interested. I'm here for you. Keep talking. Keep telling me your story. Musicians tend to be good storytellers as long as we open that door and let them tell. And immediately problem solving. This is, again, a gut instinct that comes from a really good place. And I'm guilty of it. I always say I'm horribly guilty of it. I have 2 teenagers living in my house. and a musician. They need extra help sometimes. So I have 75 solutions for every problem. And Sean is fond of saying, I'm not actually looking for solutions right now. And I have to remember, right, you just want support. A good question to ask somebody going through something hard is, would you like support or solutions right now? Do you want me to help you solve this, or do you just want me to sit back and listen? Active listening is really bringing in that empathic piece to listening. So where you're following up with curious questions, you're meeting, what they're saying with calm curiosity instead of panic and solutions. Avoid making promises. So one thing that's really hard when we're dealing with distress and worried about suicidal ideation is that the people don't want it to leave sort of the private conversation we're having. So somebody might say, like, don't tell anyone, man, I just got to get through this, I'll be fine. But if they've also shared that they're suicidal and that they have a plan, they might not be fine. So never promise that you won't seek additional help is something that we always say. Just say, I can promise to be here for you. I can't promise that I won't ask for extra help if we need it. And knowing your limit, if something goes beyond what you know that you can deal with, know that and be able to say, you know what, I think we need to bring in this other person, whoever the other person is that's there to help. So what not to say versus what to say to someone. And these are just sort of general, vague examples, but they give you an idea of how you meet someone with empathy, how you validate, and then how you can respond and keep the person talking. So instead of, like I said earlier, it can't be that bad, validating. That sounds really tough. I'm here if you need to talk. Instead of something like everybody's stressed out, just push through it, you'll get through it. I have felt that way too. I've felt overwhelmed. Do you want to take a break? Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to go for a walk and talk about it? Here's the fun fact. Research shows that people, especially adults, are more likely to engage in deep and meaningful conversation if they are walking together or doing something together, like playing cards, playing checkers, but where they're busy and not staring right at each other, but they're busy with their hands or they're moving their bodies. It sort of lessens the intensity between them and helps them open up a bit more. Right now, everybody has a supplement or vitamin for absolutely every ailment. Almost none of them have any research behind them. So instead of giving the latest thing that you saw on TikTok as a cure for everything, can I help you find support? Can I help you find a group? We know that actually adults do pretty well when they have a group of other adults that can talk through hard things with them, which is why AA is really a great resource for a lot of people. Instead of at least it's not, this is another one of my least favorite phrases where we try to compare traumas or problems. We don't need to compare. You're allowed to have depression. You're allowed to have anxiety, even if someone has it worse. You're allowed to have whatever you're going through. So I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I'm here to listen. Why didn't you say something sooner? Well, this just blames people for having a hard time speaking up. What we want to say instead is, thank you for telling me. Thank you for opening up. I'm really glad that you did. So some conversation starters. I've noticed you've been exhausted lately, or you've been mentioning exhaustion lately. How's everything going? That's pretty simple. You've been quiet lately on the bus. You haven't seemed like yourself. Is there anything that you want to talk about? Again, pretty simple. I've noticed you seem distracted lately, as if you have a lot on your mind. I have time to talk or listen if you want. You've mentioned feeling anxious. Can you tell me more about that? If you are someone who has felt anxious or felt depressed, share that so that the other person knows that you are someone who is a safe person to talk to and can understand what they're going through. I was peppering my husband with questions a few weeks ago as I was reading research on the music industry and depression and anxiety. And I was saying, who do you go to when you're on the tour, and who does what, and what's the chain of command? And he was like, well, the tour manager kind of is everything, but you wouldn't go to that person unless you really, really had to, like it was really an emergency. And he agreed that, people could learn how to talk to each other a little bit better so that they could talk more and share some of those really big feelings. So what to do? What about when someone is silent? Sometimes you ask people, you try to do a check-in, you do the noticing, you do all the right words, all the best words, and they still don't really talk. And so we have to think about why that might be. Sometimes people really don't think that they're having the struggle that other people observe them to be having. So what I say to that is you just keep checking in. If you're worried about a friend, you don't ask once and then leave it alone. You ask once and twice and three times and four times, and you keep checking in. Sometimes people might be afraid to face the problem. They might be afraid of going to therapy. There's still a stigma around therapy. They might be afraid that a therapist will tell them not to drink anymore, that they can't, do the things they normally do to unwind after a session or a show. And they are not ready to hear that. And that's legit. It is hard to hear things that you don't want to hear. They might worry about the potential consequences of just their work life, that word will get out. I mean, I know musicians who don't even ever say they take a vacation because they always want it to seem like they're home and ready for the next session or the next tour. I mean, that's how pressure filled the industry is at a very granular level. So speaking up about mental health would be something where they might think, oh no, if word gets out, people will stop hiring me. And that shouldn't be, but I can understand why people sometimes feel that way. They might not know who to trust, who will talk, and they might just not be comfortable sharing for whatever reason. There are a lot of cultural reasons that people are not used to talking about mental health. There are just a variety of reasons. So we always say at Jed that support is about being present. It's not about problem solving. So that's the easiest thing that we can do, is be there and see people and hear people. That is something that anyone can do. You're not expected to have some sort of cognitive behavioral therapy, tricks up your sleeve. You're just there to listen.
When you think of your mental health journey, what comes to mind?
Oh, what a question. I think when people hear remember to take care of your mental health, they think that everyone else is. And that's not at all accurate. For me, I'm trying to learn still to make sure that I stay okay. You know what I'm saying? But I just answered like 40 questions in one.
That's great.
It doesn't make you weak to ask for help. It doesn't. It doesn't make you weak to ask for a friend, to go to a therapist. It shouldn't make you feel weak to ask anyone for help. And you should be able to ask anyone for help. And everyone has to help someone if they need it. Starting that conversation, you don't have to make it super serious right away. You say, how are you feeling? Like, are you okay? That's what you say. Are you okay? Ask somebody. That's what they, and yeah, I'm good. Really? Are you actually good? Like, sometimes you don't even have to say anything to someone for them to know they understand. And they don't have to say anything to you. Sometimes it's about a hug. It's about somebody holding you and telling you, not even telling you anything, is what I'm saying. Holding you. The main thing I'm trying to say is that you should keep your ears open and you should listen. And I'm just dealing with it how I'm dealing with it. And I'm trying my best. Obviously, I'm not a trained professional in anything. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. But I have seen it, and I've been it. And even if it's just a little bit more comfort, that can really mean a lot to someone, because you don't know what is going on. Even in that moment, there could be something going on. And it's been like that for me. There have been certain people that have texted me right when I needed to be texted, saying they loved me and that they were thinking about me. And it really means a lot. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, you can get more information at seizetheawkward.org.
So Billy did that for us a couple of years ago, and we were grateful for her to talk and open up in that way and just share, a little bit about her own experience. And when she says, sometimes you just need a hug, that's real. And one thing I always love about the music community is musicians are such huggers. Everybody's always hugging all the time. And I love that because we need it and we don't always get it. And so that's something that's a simple solution that actually we can remind people to do, is like give your person a hug. So in terms of strategies for support, without feeling like you're overstepping, again, it's always going to come back to just leading with empathy. And like we just heard in that video, just how are you? And really, if somebody says, I'm good, even though they're not good, respect privacy. So if somebody sets a boundary, like I don't want to talk right now, I'll let you know when I do. We do need to respect that. But a couple days later, you can check back in and say, hey, just making sure you're feeling better today. Protect your own emotional well-being. So as much as it's important to listen and to kind of watch for signs and to really pay attention to those hidden clues that people sometimes send us, in music especially, we have to learn to practice self-care. I know there's not a lot of it. I know, the lifestyle, I know it personally, and I know how hard it is. And it's really important to carve out those things that you do. I mean, my husband runs 3 miles every day and listens to a podcast while he does it. No matter what time he has to report to the studio, he is up and running and doing that. And that's his self-care for the day. So, finding your times and your things that you can do is really important. Use resources if someone is really in need. So instead of sort of guessing or Googling or AIing, please don't do that. Use resources that exist. And MusiCares actually is an amazing resource that is, a group of individuals that can refer musicians to all kinds of help, including mental health and addiction help. So that's kind of built into their system already. And know when to escalate, know when you need to make that tap on the shoulder to the tour manager or, the producer or somebody else who can really come in and help if someone is really, really struggling. But just, make sure that you've tried on your own first. So in terms of responding to people, really thinking about actively listening, acknowledging their feelings, I find that 9 out of 10 times, people just want to be seen and heard. They want to be understood. And a lot of us just don't feel understood day to day. It happens across contexts, across disciplines. And so we can all stand to get a little bit better at just listening, acknowledging, and being there. Take what your person says seriously. So, trying not to brush things off is really important, especially right now, because the world feels really hard right now. Let them know they're not alone. I've talked about this with many musicians that my husband has played with, but there's a pressure on artists in these times to sort of be the light, right? To be the people that people can look to. And that's an enormous and unfair pressure, but they feel it. And so, just remembering that about your community, that they're feeling it. They're feeling like, what can I do? How do I help in this time? Just keep reminding, like Billie Eilish was saying, keep reminding it's okay to ask for help. Therapy's good. It's okay to ask. Encourage people to seek treatment, provide a referral if you have one. If you have a therapist that you love, you want to give that referral to somebody else. Don't promise to keep secrets, and get your own support after a big conversation. So as therapists, I can tell you that we do get our support. We debrief with other therapists after really difficult conversations, and just even weekly, so that we can manage the load that we're carrying on our backs. And it's important for anybody who's helping someone through a hard time to have that support on the other end for them. So I mentioned earlier the process of a warm handoff, and this is a really important skill to learn. So this is essentially where you've spoken to someone, you can see that they're really struggling. They might even say that they're open to help, and that they're open to help. So you want to walk them to that help. Handing off a phone, texting out a phone number or a link to a place is not a warm handoff. That's a very frozen handoff, right? Like, here's the thing, you do it on your own. When somebody is in active distress and they may or may not be indicating suicidal ideation, they're beyond that. They need you to help walk them through to get to that resource. And so the way you will know that they are in that place is, their emotional responses are super intense. They might even be disruptive to what's happening around them. They're clearly getting worse, lasting longer than a couple of weeks. You're noticing a pattern. This pattern is happening over and over again, or they indicate that they're a danger to themselves or to somebody else. So the warm handoff in the case of a touring musician would be an artist reaching out to the tour manager to say, somebody else on the tour is really struggling. They're feeling like they might hurt themselves, or I noticed this big change. That's when you want to get the tour manager involved. Now, I don't know actually what the protocols are, and I assume that every tour has protocols, but I know enough to know that probably not every tour has protocols. But we always say at Jed, policies and protocols are huge because it helps people know exactly where to go, who to talk to, who the next person up the chain of command is, and how to get in touch with that person quickly. Knowing where to go and who to go to next can save a life. So if you are working in a way, whether it's with touring musicians or session musicians, if you are working with groups of musicians, producers, crews, you want to make sure that you have policies in place so that everybody knows what to do. So most check-in conversations where you're kind of using that language of how's your mental health or how are you doing really, most of those conversations are not going to lead to a discussion about suicide. It's not that prevalent that every single conversation would lead to this, but we always want to train everybody at Jed to know how to respond in case it happens, because the more comfortable people are talking about suicide, even just saying the word suicide, the better off we all are to help each other. So these are words that people tend to know what they mean. It always helps to take a refresher and just take a moment to say, well, what does it actually really mean? And so, suicide is the act of ending one's life. An attempt is a non-fatal, but self-directed act with the intention of ending a life. Self-injury is something that people do that is not actually related to suicide most of the time. So people who tend to engage in self-injury are trying to get some physical relief from the emotional burden that they're feeling, but they're generally not looking to die. So we'll do a couple of say this, not that's. Language around suicide has changed significantly, and this is a good thing because it helps destigmatize it. So instead of saying committed suicide or killed himself, killed herself, we say died by suicide or lost to suicide. I like to say my dad lost his battle with his mental health. That's another way to say it. But we try really hard to eliminate the word commit because that makes it sound like it's a crime or a sin or something that was done purposely to leave everybody else behind, where anyone who's been in that place of depression knows that it's actually not that purposeful. Instead of an unsuccessful, attempt or a failed attempt, we don't want to talk about suicide as, a suicide attempt as being a failure. We just say survived or did not die in a suicide attempt because we want to make sure we're not using stigmatized language. And then, instead of saying this person is suicidal, this person is thinking about suicide or has experienced thoughts of suicide. We don't want to label people. And that's actually a big issue in terms of stigma in the musical world, is they don't want to be labeled. So making sure that we're not using that kind of language is really helpful because it just helps take away some of that pressure around it. Some specific signs you might notice are feeling helpless or hopeless, feeling like a burden, deeply overwhelmed. Researching lethal means about 58% of suicides are firearm deaths, and males are more likely to use firearms. So that's, something to think about is how do you make sure that firearms are not on a tour or are not easily accessible in high stress areas. Expressing a lot of agitation. So instead of saying I'm really depressed, adults who are in this kind of active distress are more likely to be agitated, snappy, yelling at everybody, barking at everybody. They may be talking about wanting to die and making a plan, but they may not. They may just really self-isolate and hide out and make more vague statements like, well, things will be better without me, and things like that. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of changes you might notice. Some of these are kind of repeats, but just good to pay attention to all the changes across any of these domains. And watching carefully for sleep patterns. People with depression, people think that people with depression sleep all day, all the time. Actually, often people with depression have insomnia in the middle of the night. And so they sleep a lot during the day because their sleep schedules are off from being awake during the night. So that's just something to think about. So screening is really important, suicide screening. And the good news is anyone can actually learn to be a screener. So these are the two major screenings that are easy to use, super user friendly. I actually prefer, and everybody has their own preference, right? I actually prefer the Columbia screening, the Lighthouse Project screening, because there is an app for it. So you can train anybody, producers, tour managers, etc., anybody on a tour, in how you go through the Columbia screening. And it's super easy because when you open the app, the first question is this for you or someone else? And then it sends you through a series of questions that you ask the other person, and you get rooted in one direction based on how they're answering the questions. And so at the end, and it's only a few questions, I'm making it sound like it's long, it's probably like 5 questions. By the end, you're going to get a result that's, moderate or high or really not a risk, with suggestions of what to do. The ASQ is also an easy one. They don't have the handy dandy app in the same way that Columbia does. So I just like having it in the pocket. But again, this is like a 3-question screener, very easy to administer and pretty accurate, like really good research behind both of these screenings. Being able to ask these questions is literally life-saving. Okay, so what happens if you're asking all the questions and you're doing all the things and someone does say that actually, yes, they are having suicidal thoughts? So, like I said, protocols and policies are important. So if you have those, you're going to follow those. If you don't have those, Jed is going to help you make some, and then you'll have them. Take them seriously, stay with them. You want to talk in hope, but not toxic positivity. So not everything's going to be okay. You're going to be awesome. We'll just get you some medicine and then it'll be great. That doesn't help anybody. That actually harms. So, instilling hope by way of, hey, I know what to do. I know who to call. Crisis counselors are available. And then getting that assistance, tapping on that person for extra help. A warm handoff would be, hey, I'm happy to text crisis text line with you and sit here while you connect with someone. We find that if somebody has a supportive person next to them, they're more likely to reach out for that help. And so that's an important thing to learn. Just like, hey, I'll do it with you. I'll be right here. I'll even type the words for you if it's too hard to type. That can be really helpful. So, and then 988, of course, is another resource. 988 is interesting for traveling people because 988 routes you based on your area code. And since we all have phones with area codes from our home base, but not everybody's home base is the same, and you may be in Germany when your home base is California, it can get a little complicated, but it is definitely a really good resource in an emergency. If there's a huge immediate medical emergency, somebody has already, tried to hurt themselves, then you want to call 911 because they will send, the ambulance right away. If you call 988, you're likely to get a social worker to respond, which is sort of the point of it. It's to take the police out of it, to bring people who are trained in mental health to respond to a call. So holding space is really important, and we can only hold space if we take care of ourselves. That's why I keep saying that. So taking a moment to stop and reflect and do a little self-check-in on yourself is really important. So after a hard conversation, you might want to just sit down and journal it or even just think it, but how did the conversation leave you feeling? So where's your emotion regulation following this? Where's your distress level on that continuum that we talked about earlier? Where are you feeling? do you feel like they may need additional support and resources? So maybe you went through this whole conversation and the person didn't really want resources. They just wanted you to listen, but you still feel like it. Is that something you're thinking about? So take some time to reflect on that. What I would say is get to know the resources. So ask around to figure out what's available. If people are on the road, is it telehealth resources? If people are in a studio, what are the local resources that are available? We know that a lot of musicians don't have insurance. They don't have medical care. They're missing their screenings. They're missing dental appointments. They're not getting colonoscopies. I mean, there's all kinds of, in addition to the mental health issue, there are all kinds of physical health issues that are also happening in the music community. So, what is the community mental health program that they can reach out to for low cost services? Or can MusiCares set them up with something similar on a sliding scale? And then what if, and everybody's been in this position at some time, but they need more than I can give. I've given the couple resources I know about, but I don't know what else to do. Well, the first step is really being honest with yourself and knowing when you're out of your zone and saying, like, this is beyond what I can do. Let me think about who I can call. I do get calls from people in the industry because my husband starts handing out my phone number. I know other people who are therapists married to musicians who get similar calls. So, kind of back channeling it sometimes helps, but it's also really good to just know where can you get resources that are vetted and are solid and won't break the bank. And that's really where MusiCares can come in terms of referrals. Backline is another organization that actually can get you free and low cost services. And you know what? It's good to have more than one resource. So even though one resource can do a lot, it's always good to have as many as you can find. Using I statements is really important because a lot of times in mental health conversations, what happens is people can get defensive and feel like you're saying this thing about me and I don't think that thing is true, or why are you saying that about me, or what? Stop watching me if you feel like I'm having such a hard time. So really just sharing feelings, I'm here for you. Can we talk about what you might need? I'm worried about you. I'm worried you're not getting the support that you need. I wish I could be here for you all the time. Who else can you reach out to when I'm not here? Let's figure that out together. I've heard good things about this resource, or I've heard about this person or that person. Have you thought about reaching out to them? So really like keeping it centered on those I statements so that you're acknowledging your experience and you're also kind of setting that boundary at the same time. So as you're working through these hard things, and these are really hard things, and I realize I'm making it sound a little bit simplified in this format, it can be overwhelming and it can feel like, oh no, did I say the right thing? Did I do the right thing? So what I always say is don't give up, don't give up, follow up. People are not always ready to talk the first time that they see, the first time that those behaviors become observable and somebody talks about it. Even when people come to my office, sometimes the first time they stare me down and they're not really ready to talk, but they know they need it, but they don't want to share their whole story. That makes sense. It's hard to trust people, trust a new person. It's hard to know how much you can tell another person, even if you're friends, even if you've been playing together a long time, sometimes it's hard. So keep those lines of communication open, do the check-ins. If you can't get a person to a resource, you can check in with a resource and say, what should I do next? What would be my next step? And then, just continue the check-ins and following up. Taking care of yourself is just huge. So, talking to whoever is your support person. Everybody needs their person they vent to, talk to, sit silently with, and just kind of enjoy their company when they're feeling stressed. We don't always have to talk about every stress. Advocate for self-care activities like in high stress environments. So, many moons ago, my husband was on a tour where at one point they were supposed to go one way and they went another because the artist it was too much. And so a break was needed. Take those breaks, do that self-care so that it doesn't need to be an unplanned break. Let the artist and crew know that you're a person they can talk to or who the person is that they can talk to. learn about services that can be provided. I've been telling my husband for 25 years, I think every tour bus needs a psychologist on it. That is, not sustainable and not something that most tours can add. But boy, would it make a difference. Avoid that stress promoting language that we talked about. So some of that stigmatizing language is to be avoided. Create those policies, make sure help is available if it's telehealth or, finding a local community health center or having someone on call that can intervene. That's another idea. And we really need to it's great that more research is being done on this specific community because it's such a need, but also just surveying musicians, not so much about their mental health every single time, but what are their perceived needs? What would they actually use? How would they learn to talk to other people? So I mentioned a couple of the resources already. You all know MusiCares well, Backline. I added in music support, which is actually a UK program. In the UK, they have a lot of really great music supportive programs. I like this one because they actually have a chat line that's just for musicians, but of course, it's specific to the UK. So that brings us kind of to the end of this program. I hope that, as you're walking away, you'll think about maybe one thing you learned that you could do differently to help an artist, musician, crew member. There are so many people on tours that are so important. And I always think the crews have the hardest job, honestly, because the hours are so off and they're doing heavy manual labor late at night and early in the morning and all that stuff. So it's just a lot. And also consider what's one thing that you can do to, support your own well-being. We love our surveys at Jed. So if you feel up to it, it's super quick. It's like 5 questions. But if you want to follow that QR code and take a survey and let me know how I did, that would be great. Thank you all for listening. And I hope you learned something that'll help you out.